Hi, I'm Mark, and today I want to talk about the local elections a bit more because they were a little bit overshadowed by the coronation, and I don't want that people forget about them. English local elections give Labour and small parties hope, and Prime Minister Rishi Sunak could come under pressure from the right wing now. Because in the shadow of the coronation celebrations for King Charles III and his wife Camilla, the gleanings of Thursday's English local elections were pushed into the background over the weekend. And this week, however, British Prime Minister Rishi Sunak is likely to come under pressure from the right wing after his Conservatives suffered a severe defeat. Opposition leader Keir Starmer sees himself on his way to Downing Street. That's how Labour Party propagandists try to persuade Brits. The result is not quite so clear, say the pollsters, though. Keir Starmer had, even before the coronation of the British King Charles III, cause for celebrations at London's Westminster Abbey. That's true, and he said, "There is no doubt that we are heading for a Labour majority in the next election." That's what he very enthusiastically told supporters in Medway in southeast England. That's a gross exaggeration. It will still be a while before the next general election, and the results of the local elections cannot necessarily be generalized. But still, Labour did very well in English local elections, and the Tories suffered a painful slap in the face. Local councils were reappointed in 230 English local authorities on Thursday, with a total of more than 8,000 seats up for election. The last elections in these municipalities took place in 2019. At the weekend, it was clear the Tories lost more than 1,000 seats in the local councils, and this means that for the first time since 2002, the opposition Labour Party has gained 500 seats at local level, making it the strongest force in the country. But there was no mistaking the ruling party's defeat. Overall, the Conservatives lost 1,058 local seats, nearly a third of the previous number, and a majority in more than half of the 81 local governments they previously controlled. The gains were split between Labour, with up 536 seats, the Liberal Democrats with up 405, and the Greens with up 241. For the first time, the Green Party controls a local government in the deeply conservative county of Suffolk. And according to a BBC projection, Labour got 35% overall, the Tories 26%, and the Liberals 20%. Some were already comparing the results to the 1996 local elections, which preceded the overwhelming Labour victory under ex-Prime Minister Tony Blair in the general election a year later. The vote was seen as the first mood test for Sunak, and this time too, a parliamentary election will follow in just over a year. For example, Labour won an absolute majority in local councils in cities like Medway, Plymouth and Stoke-on-Trent, which were all Brexit constituencies, while the Liberal Democrats took cities like Maidenhead and Windsor from the Tories. As I said, Prime Minister Sunak spoke just of a disappointing result, and internal party opponents are already sharpening their knives. Lord Peter Cruddas, promoted to the House of Lords by ex-Prime Minister Boris Johnson, will convene the grassroots organization CDO, which he finances next weekend. Speeches will be given by representatives of the hard right wing of this party, such as ex-Minister Priti Patel. And veteran John Redwood called for tax cuts announced by short-term Prime Minister Liz Truss in the autumn, prompting the financial markets to put an idiot premium on the UK government bonds. In the London commuter belt, safe Tory territories for many years, there have been clear signs that the electorate is subordinating partisan considerations to the desire to leave the Conservatives, as British majority voting forces are overall there. And in Bracknell Forest, west of the capital, 46% of voters voted for the Tories, more than twice as many as Labour or Liberal Democrats, not to mention the Greens. But because in many constituencies people tactically pooled their votes on the top-ranked opposition candidate, Labour was 22 seats ahead of the Tories and the Lib Dems. The British media, always prone to speculation, are already talking about the so-called hung parliament. That means a lower house in which no party has an absolute majority. However, Pollsters warn against transferring municipal results to a national parliamentary election. Local elections are just that, wrote veteran political expert Colin Rawlings and Michael Thrasher of Nuffield College in Oxford. The local election often served as a lesson for the government party, and there also political professor Tony Travers from the London School of Economics agrees. But that didn't stop the smaller parties from getting involved in the speculation. Edward Davey of the Liberals told the BBC that he had no objection to entering into a coalition with Labour. And Stephen Flynn of the Scottish Nationalists hopes they will tip the scales. But this confirms fears that many Tories have expressed in recent months. In the Brexit-affected parts of the country, the governing party is increasingly losing voters to Labour, while the Liberal Democrats are on the rise in the traditional Tory strongholds in southern England. And Ed Davey, the leader of the Liberal Democrats, spoke of a groundbreaking result. And the third party won in places that have been Tory blue for decades and have sent prominent Conservative MPs to the House of Commons. In Maidenhead, for example, that's the constituency of ex-Prime Minister Theresa May. And some Tories have no illusions and openly admit that this is a bitter defeat. So some at least are sane. And I'm saying this about this name. We are paying the price for Boris Johnson and Liz Truss, said former Brexit Secretary David Davis. That I agree with him is a new. There may be some truth to that, but dissatisfaction with the Tories is not only evident in personal details such as the two ex-prime ministers. Election strategists have repeatedly pointed out that the government's right-wing populist thrust, including, for example, the aggressive rhetoric against migrants, are alienating some moderate Tory voters. And critics within the party accuse the Prime Minister of lacking the campaign strength of his predecessor Johnson. Sunak appears deliberately relaxed and smart, and in conversations with citizens, however, the wealthy ex-investment banker does not come across as naturally as, you have to, in this case, to say down-to-earth populist Johnson. In a first reaction, the Prime Minister, as I said, was optimistic, and he spoke of good results in some of the hard-fought districts. But observers saw it differently. Today's elections are a catastrophe for the Conservatives, emphasized the portal Byline Times. And around the coronation celebrations for King Charles III, Rishi Sunak was undeterred by the defeat in the local elections. He hosted a dinner at the government building in Downing Street, which was also attended by Ukrainian families. He still has some time before the elections to turn things around again, but Labour leader Keir Starmer's optimism is justified a bit, but premature. And somebody, when I first talked about the election, said in the comments that Phil from A Different Bias was has done a video where he showed why this really is the same like last time, why they are so far ahead of the Tories. And I answered to that comment with, well, Phil has to say this, he is a Labour member. There's a lot of truth in that, by the way. And I'm still not convinced that this is the case, because the numbers this time were much closer than in the time of Tony Blair. And as I mentioned several times before, you cannot just put the results from a local collection on a general election, especially when Scotland, Wales and Northern Ireland were not part of this election. The election in Northern Ireland is a bit later this month. And on the other hand, the Liberal Democrats are always doing well in local elections, but not that well as they do there in the general election. So definitely some of the Liberal voters will go to Labour. But first of all, there is not as a huge gap between the Tories and Labour as it was when Tony Blair became Prime Minister the first time, between the local elections and the general election. And we are in a completely different time now. The topics are completely different. And as I mentioned in my last video, with the local elections, there were local issues as well that made the Tories win a Labour stronghold. But there were completely local elections. Rishi Sunak has nothing to do with that win. And the same goes the other way around. There's a lot of local issues in local elections as well. You get a little boost in a local election, for example, if it's at the same time as a general election. I know this from standing myself. When you have a general election at the same time with a local election, and the mood for your party is good overall in the country, you do a little bit better in your local elections as well. But it's not that much influence. You will not lose half of your seats or whatever because of that, usually because there's a lot of local stuff involved here. And so this was not just a complete prediction for the next time, especially when you look at the overall votes, and even the Greens having a council. So there is some time to go. The Tories still have a lot of chances to, I wouldn't say turn this completely around, but to narrow the gap much more. And that completely depends on the Tories at the moment. Because one thing that is extremely different between the time of Tony Blair and now is that Tony Blair was much more popular with the public than Keir Starmer is today. Keir Starmer is not very popular, and that is a big problem for Labour at the moment. And they really have to work hard. And Rishi Sunak is not a campaigner like Johnson. That is something good for Labour at the moment. But Keir Starmer has to, as we would say, put in some more shovels of coal into the train to get the thing started. Nothing is solved yet, and nothing is sure yet. And there's another topic I quickly have to mention because of some comments. The food banks I talked about recently. First of all, this whataboutism is really the Brexiteers and Tory hardliners, hardline fans that always want to counter with what about Germany, what about France, what about blah. This is the UK channel, and you don't have to ask why I'm not talking about Germany or France or Spain or whatever here on this channel. This is my UK channel, and I talk about the UK on this channel. If you want to see me talking about other countries, go to my other channels where I talk about these countries. And secondly, there is a major difference between the food bank situation in the UK and in Germany, and that's because of the social benefit system in the first place, because it's completely different here than in the UK. And unemployment system is different as well. Since the whole crisis began, I personally, and I'm open about this, because companies are spending less for advertising, people need more time working than watching videos, people don't have that much money for luxury, like being a Patreon for some people or buying merchandise. That ended with the crisis. It hasn't ended, but it's much lower nowadays than it was before the crisis started. With my YouTube, I earn a little less than someone here in Germany who claims benefits, but it's the situation as it is. Everyone has to cope with his own situation, and but I don't have to go to a food bank, and that's the difference. I'm working. May have a little less money than somebody claiming benefits, but because there's a lot they can get, if they have a much higher rent than I do, because I live in a very nice place, not in city center. I'm not that crazy, but it's quieter here for filming, and they will have more, but it's not that, and I have to spend a lot for the channel as well. It's not just earning, you also have to spend in, like the broke microphone last time and stuff. But I don't have to go to a food bank, even if I learn a little bit less at the moment here in Germany, because the prices are not that insane here. We still have a lot of very affordable food products here that you don't have to think about heating or eating. And nevertheless, the people on benefits here, because those are the ones who are allowed to go to the food banks, And the refugees, by the way, thanks Ellie for mentioning that in the comments. We had millions of refugees recently, especially almost or even more than a million in between. It was more than a million from Ukraine, but some went to families and so on. We are almost at a million refugees from Ukraine. We got in the beginning of this year already 100,000 new refugees from other places and so on. And since 2015, we got a lot of refugees into Germany. And that's why we have food banks for quite some time. We had them for a very long time in some places, but it's not because you can't live on your benefits here. People getting social benefits here in Germany. That includes housing and everything. And even in places where it's expensive, where you can't have anything cheap, they will get the help they need. And that's the point. They get the help with their heating. They don't have any problems with the rising cost in heating. Our country is paying for this. They won't get into trouble like this. They don't have to go to a food bank. Food banks here are an additional help for people who want maybe a larger variety of stuff sometimes, or would like to save some money for their kids for something special. It's not that you need them to survive in Germany, and in the UK there are places where you need them to survive even if you have a job, and that's the big difference between these two things. And that's why whataboutism doesn't work anyway. Whatever is happening somewhere, to say, yeah, but it's worse somewhere else, which isn't this time, but still, doesn't make the situation any better. And so, as I said a long time ago, I do delete these whataboutism comments. They are just completely out of line. They have nothing to do with the reality, and they are just an attempt to get people's minds away from the real issue. And that's why I don't delete many comments, except insults or completely troll nonsense, where I know from first instance that this is just a troll, in many cases at the moment a Russian troll. I will delete them, and that's it. Sometimes I leave them when I see that some of my viewers have a lot of fun with them in the comments. Then I don't delete them sometime and just leave them there for play. But I love it when there are serious discussions, and the point of view can be very different there. But what I won't allow is just complete populist nonsense, no insults, and no trolling. All based discussions on real thinking. Have them. And this was long enough now, so I say I'll see you in my next video. I'll be back.